The dust-laden wind carried more than just the scent of sagebrush as Daisy Palmer stepped off the stagecoach into the sweltering heat of Copper Creek, Arizona Territory, 1885. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a mixture of exhaustion from the 3-week journey from Boston and apprehension about meeting her future husband. At 22, she had left everything familiar behind, answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride placed by one Arthur Holloway, a successful rancher in need of a wife. "Copper Creek," announced the driver, tossing down her weathered carpetbag. "End of the line, miss." Daisy smoothed her wrinkled traveling dress, painfully aware of how disheveled she must look. She glanced around, searching for a man who might resemble the description Arthur had provided in his letters, tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache. There had been 6 letters in total, each more persuasive than the last, painting a picture of a comfortable life in this frontier town. A life far from the dreary existence as a seamstress that awaited her in Boston after her parents' passing. No one approached her. "Excuse me," she asked the stagecoach driver. "Might you know where I could find Mr. Arthur Holloway?" The driver scratched his beard. "Holloway Ranch is about 3 miles north of town. You wanting to head there now?" "Yes, please. He's expecting me." The driver's expression changed, a flash of something pity perhaps crossing his weathered face. "I ain't heading that way today, miss, but the general store might know if he's in town." With a nod of thanks, Daisy gathered her belongings and made her way down the dusty main street. Copper Creek was smaller than she had imagined, a single thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings. A saloon, a general store, a small hotel, and what appeared to be a sheriff's office made up the heart of the settlement. Men in dusty clothes paused to stare at her, their gazes making her acutely aware of being a newcomer and a woman alone. The bell above the door jingled as she entered the general store, a welcome respite from the afternoon heat. A middle-aged woman looked up from behind the counter. "Afternoon," the woman said. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," Daisy replied, setting down her bag. "I'm looking for Mr. Arthur Holloway. I'm Daisy Palmer, his intended." The woman's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, my stars," she whispered. "You're the mail-order bride?" Daisy felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Yes, madam." "Oh, dear girl." The woman came around the counter, taking Daisy's gloved hands in hers. "I'm Martha Williams. I run this store with my husband, George, and I'm afraid, there's been a development." A cold sensation spread through Daisy's chest. "Development?" "Arthur Holloway got married 3 weeks ago," Martha said gently. "To a widow from Phoenix. I believe he tried to send word, but—" "Married?" The word fell from Daisy's lips like a stone. "But I've traveled all this way. I sold everything I had." Martha squeezed her hands. "I'm so sorry, dear. These things, they happen out here sometimes. Men get lonely, and when opportunity presents itself." Daisy sank onto a nearby chair, her mind reeling. All those carefully laid plans, the hope of a new beginning, gone in an instant. The money spent on travel had been nearly everything she had saved. She had barely enough for a night's lodging, let alone a return ticket to Boston. What will I do now? The question wasn't directed at Martha so much as at the universe itself. The bell above the door jingled again, and both women turned to see a tall man enter. He removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair and a face tanned by years under the western sun. His eyes, a startling blue, found Daisy immediately. "Afternoon, Mrs. Williams," he said, his voice deep and pleasant. "Got that order of fence posts in yet?" "Just arrived yesterday, Preston," Martha answered. "But we have something of a situation here." She gestured toward Daisy. "This young lady has come all the way from Boston to marry Arthur Holloway, not knowing he's already taken a wife." The man named Preston studied Daisy with an intensity that made her want to check her appearance. "That so?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Daisy answered, straightening her shoulders despite the tears threatening to fall. "It appears I've made a very long journey for nothing." Preston McAllister had seen his share of hardship in his 32 years, but something about the quiet dignity of the young woman sitting in Martha's store stirred something in him. She was pretty, with auburn hair swept into a neat bun and eyes the color of warm honey, currently glistening with unshed tears she was too proud to let fall. "Holloway's a fool," he said, surprising himself with the declaration. "Where will you go now, Miss Palmer, Daisy Palmer?" she replied. "And I don't know. I have very little money left." Preston replaced his hat. Decision made. "Mrs. Williams, I'll come back for those fence posts tomorrow. Miss Palmer needs to get to the Holloway ranch to sort this mess out. Arthur owes her an explanation at the very least." Martha nodded approvingly. "That he does." "I couldn't impose," Daisy began. "No imposition," Preston cut in. "My ranch borders Holloway's. I'm heading that way regardless." This wasn't entirely true, but the lie came easily. "My wagon's outside." Daisy hesitated, glancing between Preston and Martha. "Preston McAllister is one of the most honorable men in the territory," Martha assured her. "You'll be safe with him." 20 minutes later, Daisy found herself seated beside Preston on the bench of a wagon heading north out of town. Her carpet bag and trunk were secured in the back, along with supplies Preston had purchased in town. They rode in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. "I'm sorry about your situation," Preston finally said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Arthur Holloway is known for being impulsive, but this exceeds even his usual thoughtlessness." "You know him well?" Daisy asked. "Well enough. Our ranches share a water source. We've had our disagreements, but we get along when necessary." Preston glanced at her. "If you don't mind my asking, how did you come to agree to marry a man you've never met?" Daisy's hands tightened in her lap. "My parents died last winter, influenza. I had been working as a seamstress, but the pay was poor, and without my parents' additional income," she trailed off. "Mr. Holloway's advertisement promised a comfortable home and respectful treatment. His letters were kind. It seemed a better option than what awaited me in Boston." Preston nodded, understanding all too well the desperate choices people sometimes made. "And now I'm not sure," Daisy admitted. "I have enough money for perhaps one night at a hotel, but not for a return ticket. I'll need to find work quickly." The road curved, revealing a sprawling valley below. In the distance, a large ranch house stood surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. Cattle dotted the pastures beyond. "That's Holloway's place," Preston said, pointing. "My ranch is just over that ridge to the east. Smaller operation, but it suits me." As they approached the Holloway ranch, Daisy felt her stomach twist with anxiety. What would she say to the man who had promised to marry her and then chosen another? What would she say to his new wife? A woman stepped onto the porch as the wagon rolled into the yard. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair and a pretty, if wary, face. Behind her, a tall man with a mustache appeared. Arthur Holloway, Daisy presumed, looking exactly as he had described himself. Preston brought the wagon to a halt and jumped down, coming around to help Daisy descend. She took his offered hand, grateful for the steadying presence as she faced the couple who had inadvertently upended her life. "McAllister," Arthur called out, clearly surprised. "What brings you out this way?" His eyes shifted to Daisy, confusion evident. "You have a visitor, Holloway," Preston replied, his tone cool. "One you should have been expecting, if I understand correctly." Recognition dawned on Arthur's face, followed quickly by dismay. "Miss Palmer? But I sent a telegram." "I never received any telegram, Mr. Holloway," Daisy said, finding her voice. "I arrived today, expecting to meet my intended husband, only to discover he'd already married another." The woman beside Arthur paled, her eyes widening. "Arthur? What is this?" Arthur ran a hand over his face. "Rebecca, I can explain. This is a misunderstanding." "Is it?" Daisy asked, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. 6 letters, Mr. Holloway. 6 letters in which you asked me to be your wife, promising a life together. I sold everything I owned to get here." Rebecca Holloway's face hardened. "Arthur, you tell me right now what's going on." "I placed an advertisement for a bride before I met you," Arthur explained hastily. "Miss Palmer here responded. But then I met you in Phoenix, and everything changed. I sent a telegram to Boston telling her not to come, that circumstances had changed." "When?" Preston asked. "What? When did you send this telegram?" Arthur shifted uncomfortably. "About 2 weeks ago." 2 weeks, Preston repeated. "And when did you actually marry Mrs. Holloway?" 3 weeks ago, Arthur admitted, Preston's jaw tightened. So you married first, then thought to inform Miss Palmer that her journey would be wasted? I meant to write sooner, but with the wedding and bringing Rebecca home, it slipped my mind until— It slipped your mind? Daisy interrupted, disbelief coloring her tone. My entire future slipped your mind? Rebecca stepped forward, her expression a mixture of anger and compassion. Miss Palmer, I had no idea about any of this. Had I known Arthur had promised himself to another— She turned to her husband. You should be ashamed, Arthur Holloway. Arthur looked genuinely distressed now. I am sorry, Miss Palmer, truly. But you've come all this way for nothing. I'm a married man now. The bluntness of his statement hit Daisy like a physical blow. Yes, I can see that, she managed, fighting to maintain her composure. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group, broken only when Preston cleared his throat. Well, since Miss Palmer has come all this way for nothing, as you put it, he said, his voice carrying an edge, the least you can do is offer her some hospitality while she considers her options. Arthur looked to his wife, who nodded firmly. Of course, he agreed. Miss Palmer, you're welcome to stay for dinner, and we have a room you can use for the night. The thought of spending even one night under the same roof as the man who had so carelessly discarded her was unbearable. Thank you, but I couldn't possibly impose, Daisy said stiffly. It's no imposition, Rebecca insisted, shooting a dark look at her husband. And we owe you that much at least. Preston stepped closer to Daisy, lowering his voice. You don't have to stay if you don't want to. I can take you back to town. Daisy looked up at him, seeing compassion in his blue eyes. There was something steady about him, something trustworthy that she hadn't felt from Arthur even in his letters. Actually, Preston said, raising his voice to address the Holloways. Miss Palmer has another option. He turned to Daisy. You came west to start a new life. That opportunity hasn't disappeared just because Holloway made other arrangements. What are you suggesting? Arthur asked suspiciously. Preston kept his eyes on Daisy. I'm suggesting that Miss Palmer still has choices. Holloway may have broken his promise, but there are other possibilities here. He took a deep breath. Miss Palmer, you came to be a rancher's wife. I happen to be a rancher in need of a wife. Daisy stared at him, certain she had misheard. Mr. McAllister, we've only just met. Yes, he acknowledged, and I'm not proposing marriage, not yet. But I am offering you a place to stay, proper employment, and time to consider your options. A slight smile touched his lips. Holloway was told you'd been replaced. Well, then you're free to choose me or not, once you've had time to think. Preston, Arthur began, you can't seriously— I seriously can, Preston cut him off. And my proposal is more honorable than yours ever was, Holloway. I'm offering Miss Palmer a job as my housekeeper, with proper lodging in my mother's old room and fair wages. If, over time, we suit each other, then perhaps something more. But that would be her choice entirely, made with clear eyes and no desperation forcing her hand. Rebecca Holloway looked at Preston with new respect. That's a generous offer, Mr. McAllister. Daisy's mind raced. The proposal was unexpected but not unwelcome. It would solve her immediate problem of needing employment and lodging, while giving her time to consider her future. And there was something about Preston McAllister that inspired confidence, a steadiness, a clarity of purpose that Arthur Holloway had never conveyed even in his flowery letters. Mr. McAllister, she said carefully, I appreciate your offer, but I wouldn't want to create difficulties between neighbors. Preston's gaze flicked to Arthur, then back to Daisy. Holloway and I have managed to coexist despite our differences for years. This won't change that. He paused. The choice is yours, Miss Palmer. Town, the Holloways, or my ranch. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Daisy looked at Arthur and Rebecca Holloway. The woman seemed genuinely sympathetic, but the thought of staying with them, even for one night, filled her with discomfort, and returning to town with no prospects and limited funds was equally unappealing. She turned back to Preston. If you're certain, Mr. McAllister, I would be grateful for the opportunity. Relief flickered across his features. I am certain. Then I accept your offer of employment. Arthur stepped forward. Miss Palmer, I really do feel responsible. Let me at least offer you some compensation for your trouble. Preston's expression darkened. You think you can buy your way out of this? No, but— "I don't want your money, Mr. Holloway," Daisy interrupted. "I came here looking for a new start. It appears I'll still have one, just not the one I expected." She turned to Rebecca. "I wish you both well, truly." Rebecca nodded, her expression softening. "You're a gracious woman, Miss Palmer, more than my husband deserves." She shot Arthur another reproachful look. "We should be going," Preston said. "It'll be dark soon, and we have a ways to ride." As Preston helped Daisy back into the wagon, Arthur approached. "McAllister," he said quietly, "you take care of her." Preston's eyes were cold. "Better than you would have, Holloway. That's a promise." The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon as they left the Holloway ranch behind, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Daisy sat silently beside Preston, her thoughts in tumult. In a single afternoon, her entire future had been rewritten. "I hope I didn't overstep," Preston said after they had traveled some distance. "Offering you employment like that." "No," Daisy replied. "I'm grateful. I don't know what I would have done otherwise." "You seem to be handling yourself quite well back there," he observed. "Most women would have been in tears, confronting a situation like that." "I did my crying on the inside," Daisy admitted, "and I suspect I'll do more of it later. But it wouldn't have helped in the moment." Preston nodded approvingly. "The West requires a certain fortitude. You seem to have it naturally." He glanced at her. "May I ask what your skills are? Besides sewing, I mean." "I can cook reasonably well," Daisy said. "I kept house for my parents and myself. I can read and write, do basic figures. I'm a quick learner." "That's more than enough," Preston assured her. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, left 3 months ago when her daughter had a baby back east. I've been managing on my own since then, but managing is a generous description." As they crested a ridge, a new vista opened before them. A modest but well-maintained ranch house stood in a protected valley, with a large barn, corrals, and outbuildings nearby. The house wasn't as grand as Holloway's, but it had a warmth to it, with a wide porch and windows that caught the setting sun. "McAllister Ranch," Preston said, a note of pride in his voice. "My father started it 30 years ago. I took over when he passed 8 years back." "It's lovely," Daisy said sincerely. "More welcoming than the Holloway place." Preston smiled, the first full smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the lines around his eyes and revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. "Glad you think so. It's home." As they approached, a dog came bounding out to meet them, a large, shaggy beast with mismatched ears that barked enthusiastically. "That's Rusty," Preston explained. "Don't mind him. He's friendly, just loud." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and Preston jumped down, coming around to help Daisy. As his hands encircled her waist to lift her down, she was acutely aware of his strength and the unexpected gentleness of his touch. "Thank you," she murmured, suddenly shy. Preston nodded, stepping back quickly. "Let me show you inside, then I'll fetch your things." The interior of the house was simple but comfortable. A large main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a stone fireplace along one wall. The kitchen beyond was spacious, with a large cast-iron stove and ample workspace. Preston led her down a short hallway, opening a door to reveal a modest but pleasant bedroom. "This was my mother's room," he explained. "After she passed, Mrs. Winters used it. It's yours now, for as long as you choose to stay." Daisy stepped inside, taking in the neatly made bed with its colorful quilts, the polished dresser, and the small writing desk beneath the window. "It's perfect, Mr. McAllister. Thank you." "Preston," he said, "if we're to live under the same roof, you might as well use my given name." "Preston," she repeated, "and I'm Daisy." He nodded. "I'll bring in your trunk and bag, then start on supper. You must be exhausted after your journey." "I should be the one preparing supper," Daisy protested. "It's why you hired me." "Your employment starts tomorrow," Preston said firmly. "Tonight, you're a guest. Rest. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage bacon and beans." True to his word, Preston returned shortly with her belongings, then left her to settle in. Daisy sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself a moment to process the day's events. Tears came, but they were brief, more from exhaustion and the release of tension than genuine sorrow. She had never met Arthur Holloway after all. She hadn't lost a love, only an idea, a hope, and in its place, something new had appeared. An opportunity she hadn't anticipated, with a man she didn't know, but who had shown her more consideration in an afternoon than Arthur had in months of correspondence. After washing her face and changing into a fresh dress, Daisy joined Preston in the kitchen. Despite his disclaimer about his cooking abilities, the aroma of frying bacon was appealing, and her stomach reminded her that she hadn't eaten since early morning. "Can I help with anything?" she asked. Preston looked up from the stove. "You could set the table if you'd like. Plates are in that cupboard, utensils in the drawer below." They worked in companionable silence, and soon sat down to a simple but satisfying meal of bacon, beans, and freshly baked biscuits that Preston admitted he'd purchased from the baker in town that morning. "Tomorrow I'll show you around the ranch," Preston said as they ate. "It's not as large as Holloway's operation, but we do well enough. I have 2 hands who help with the cattle and horses, Miguel and his son, Carlos. They live in a cabin near the south pasture. How many cattle do you run?" "About 300 head currently, hoping to expand next year if the market holds." Preston studied her across the table. "May I ask what you know about ranching? What did Holloway tell you in his letters?" Daisy felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Not much, I'm afraid. He wrote about the beauty of the land, the size of his house, the social standing he enjoyed in the community, but very little about the actual work of running a ranch." Preston snorted. "Typical. Holloway likes to present himself as a gentleman rancher, but ranching is hard work, no matter how you dress it up." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Daisy assured him. "I believe you." Preston's expression softened. "Look, I want to be clear about something. When I said you were free to choose me, I meant it as a choice, not an expectation. You've had one man make promises and break them. I won't be another." Daisy met his gaze. "I appreciate your honesty. And for now, I'm simply grateful for the employment and a place to stay. The rest, well, time will tell." Preston nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. "Time will tell," he agreed. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Daisy woke to the unfamiliar sounds of a ranch coming to life. Roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, the clang of metal on metal from what she would later learn was the blacksmith shed. She dressed quickly in her most practical gown, eager to begin her new duties. She found Preston in the kitchen, already dressed in work clothes, brewing coffee on the stove. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Daisy admitted. "What time do you usually have breakfast?" "Around now," Preston said with a smile. "But I usually just have coffee and whatever's left from the night before." Daisy shook her head. "That won't do? Do you have eggs? Flour?" Preston gestured to a pantry door. "Mrs. Winters kept things well stocked, and I try to maintain it. Help yourself to whatever you need." Within half an hour, Daisy had prepared a proper breakfast of scrambled eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits. Preston watched her work with unconcealed appreciation. "If this is a sample of your cooking, I may have gotten the better end of our arrangement," he commented as he dug into the meal. After breakfast, Preston took her on a tour of the ranch. The main house sat at the center of the property, with a large barn, corrals, and various outbuildings nearby. Beyond stretched pastures where cattle grazed, and further still, the rugged landscape rose toward distant mountains. "The creek provides water year-round," Preston explained, pointing to a ribbon of silver winding through the property. "That's what makes this land valuable. It's the same creek that runs through Holloway's property, which is why we occasionally have disputes." "About water rights?" Preston nodded. "Water is life out here. Without it, nothing else matters." They met Miguel and Carlos at the corrals, where the 2 men were working with a spirited young horse. Miguel, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a ready smile, tipped his hat to Daisy. "Miss Palmer will be staying with us as housekeeper," Preston explained. "Daisy, this is Miguel Vasquez and his son Carlos. They know more about horses than anyone in the territory." "Welcome to McAllister Ranch, Miss Palmer," Miguel said warmly. "It will be good to have someone taking care of the house again. The boss, he tries, but—" He shrugged expressively. Preston laughed. "I admit my limitations freely." Carlos, a handsome young man of perhaps 20, smiled shyly. "My wife Maria would be happy to help you settle in, Miss Palmer. She comes from town on Sundays." "That's very kind," Daisy replied. "I'd appreciate any guidance." As they continued their tour, Daisy began to understand the rhythm of the ranch. It was a working operation, without the pretensions of the Holloway place, but there was pride in how Preston spoke of his cattle, his land, the improvements he'd made over the years. "My father started with 30 head of cattle and a dream," he told her as they stood on a rise overlooking the valley. "He worked himself to the bone building this place. When I took over, I promised myself I'd make it even better for the next generation." "Do you have children?" Daisy asked, then immediately felt foolish. "I'm sorry, that's a personal question." "No children," Preston replied. "I would need a wife first." His eyes met hers briefly, then returned to the landscape. "But someday, perhaps, this land deserves to be passed down." They returned to the house around midday, and Daisy set about preparing lunch and then tackling the household chores. The house was reasonably tidy but showed signs of a bachelor's care, or lack thereof. She found satisfaction in bringing order to the kitchen, sweeping the floors, and dusting surfaces that clearly hadn't seen a cloth in months. Preston left her to her work, heading out to join Miguel and Carlos with the cattle. When he returned late in the afternoon, he found the house transformed clean, orderly, with the scent of baking filling the air. "Something smells wonderful," he said, removing his hat as he entered. Daisy looked up from the dough she was kneading. "I found some apples in the root cellar. I thought pie might be nice with dinner." Preston's eyes widened. "Pie? I haven't had apple pie since Mrs. Winters left." Daisy smiled, pleased by his enthusiasm. "It's the least I can do, considering your kindness." That evening, after a hearty dinner and generous slices of pie, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Rusty sprawled at Preston's feet, occasionally thumping his tail when one of them spoke. "Was it very difficult?" Daisy asked suddenly. "Taking over the ranch when your father died?" Preston was quiet for a moment. "Yes and no," he finally said. "I'd been working alongside him since I was old enough to ride, so I knew the operation. But making the final decisions, carrying the full weight of responsibility, that took some adjustment." He glanced at her. "What about you? Was it difficult after your parents passed?" Daisy nodded, appreciating his understanding. "Very. Not just the grief, but the practical matters. Suddenly every decision was mine alone to make." "Including the decision to become a mail-order bride," Preston observed. "Yes," she acknowledged. "In retrospect, perhaps not my wisest choice. But I felt so alone in Boston, and the prospect of a new beginning seemed—" She trailed off, unsure how to express the desperation and hope that had driven her decision. "Seemed like the right path at the time," Preston finished for her. "We all make choices based on what we know in the moment. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. And sometimes," Daisy said softly, "they lead us somewhere unexpected but possibly better." Preston's eyes met hers in the fading light. "Possibly," he agreed. In the days that followed, Daisy settled into life at the McAllister ranch. The work was steady, but satisfying, keeping the house, preparing meals, learning the rhythm of ranch life. Preston was considerate, always thanking her for meals and commenting appreciatively on the improvements she made to the house. But he maintained a respectful distance, true to his word that her position as housekeeper came with no other expectations. They developed a comfortable routine: breakfast together in the early morning before Preston headed out to work with Miguel and Carlos. Daisy would bring lunch to them in the fields or corrals if they were working close by. Dinner was always shared at the kitchen table, their conversations growing more relaxed and wide-ranging as they became better acquainted. She learned that Preston had been born on the ranch, had attended school in town until he was 16, and had briefly considered becoming a lawyer before his father's declining health brought him back to ranching full-time. He spoke fondly of his parents, his father's unwavering work ethic, his mother's gentle strength and love of beauty, even in their rugged surroundings. In turn, Daisy told him about her childhood in Boston, her father's work as a printer, her mother's skill with a needle that had inspired Daisy's own abilities as a seamstress. She spoke of her dreams of perhaps one day having her own dress shop, though she'd put those aside when the opportunity to come west had presented itself. "You could still have that shop someday," Preston remarked one evening as they sat by the fire. "Copper Creek is growing. There's no dressmaker in town yet." "Perhaps," Daisy mused. "Though I'm finding I enjoy ranch life more than I expected." Preston smiled. "It has its charms." On her third Sunday at the ranch, Carlos's wife Maria came to visit as promised. A lively young woman with a ready laugh, Maria brought fresh tortillas and a wealth of advice about everything from keeping chickens to dealing with the occasional scorpion in the house. "Preston is a good man," Maria told Daisy as they worked together in the kitchen. "Very respected in the community. Many mothers with daughters have set their caps for him. But he has always been focused on the ranch. We have a strictly professional relationship," Daisy felt compelled to point out. "I'm his housekeeper." Maria's knowing smile suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "For now, perhaps. But I see how he looks at you when you are not watching." The comment stayed with Daisy long after Maria left. She had been so focused on establishing herself in her new role, on proving her worth as an employee, that she hadn't allowed herself to consider the possibility of anything more. But in quiet moments, she found herself watching Preston as he worked with the horses or studied his ledgers in the evening, admiring the quiet competence he brought to everything he did. One afternoon in her fourth week at the ranch, Preston returned to the house earlier than usual, his expression troubled. "Is everything all right?" Daisy asked, setting aside the shirt she was mending. "Cattle are missing," Preston said grimly. "About 20 head from the north pasture. Miguel found tracks leading toward Blackwater Canyon." "Rustlers?" Daisy had heard about cattle thieves, but had never considered they might affect the ranch directly. Preston nodded. "Seems likely. I need to ride out with Miguel and Carlos to investigate. Maybe track them if the trail's still fresh." He hesitated. "We might be gone overnight. Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course," Daisy assured him, though the thought made her uneasy. "Rusty will stay with me?" "He will," Preston confirmed. "And I'll leave you my spare revolver. You know how to use one?" Daisy shook her head. "I've never fired a gun." Preston retrieved the revolver from a cabinet, checking that it was loaded before bringing it to her. "It's simple enough. Point and squeeze the trigger, but it has a kick, so be prepared." He demonstrated how to hold it, his hands warm against hers as he positioned her fingers correctly. "Hopefully you won't need it, but better to be prepared." He left within the hour, riding out with Miguel and Carlos, all three men carrying rifles and provisions for what might be an extended tracking mission. Daisy watched them go, an unexpected fear clutching at her heart. She had grown accustomed to Preston's steady presence, the security of knowing he was nearby. That night, alone in the house, except for Rusty, Daisy found it difficult to sleep. Every creak of the settling house, every distant animal call seemed magnified in Preston's absence. She kept the revolver on the nightstand, though the thought of actually using it terrified her, almost as much as the prospect of intruders. Morning came without incident, but Preston and the others didn't return. Daisy went about her usual tasks, trying to keep busy to distract from her worry. By midday, she had cleaned the entire house, baked bread, and mended 3 shirts. Still no sign of the men. As afternoon waned into evening, Daisy sat on the porch, straining to see any movement on the horizon. Rusty lay beside her, occasionally raising his head to sniff the air. Suddenly, the dog's ears perked up, and he let out a low growl. Daisy stood, peering into the distance. 3 riders were approaching, but something about their silhouettes told her it wasn't Preston, Miguel, and Carlos. These men rode differently, hunched forward, their horses moving at an aggressive pace. Fear spiked through her. Rusty's growl deepened as he positioned himself in front of Daisy, hackles raised. The riders drew closer, and Daisy could make out rough-looking men, unshaven and dusty. One had a bandana pulled up over the lower half of his face, despite the heat. "Stay, Rusty," she murmured, backing toward the door. The revolver was inside, on the kitchen table where she'd left it after cleaning. She needed to reach it before the men reached the house. She had just grasped the handle when the first rider called out. "Hello, the house. Anyone home?" Daisy's heart pounded. Should she answer, hide, pretend no one was home? Rusty made that last option impossible, his barking now fierce and continuous. "I see you there, madam," the rider called. "Just want to water our horses. We've been riding hard." Something in his tone set alarm bells ringing. These weren't ordinary travelers seeking hospitality. Daisy slipped inside, grabbing the revolver and checking it as Preston had shown her. She returned to the doorway, keeping the gun hidden in the folds of her skirt. "Mr. McAllister isn't here," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "But he's expected back any minute with his men." The riders exchanged glances. The one with the bandana spat to the side. "That right? McAllister out tracking his missing cattle, I expect." Daisy's blood ran cold. How would they know about the missing cattle unless— "You'd best move on," she said, her voice stronger now. "There's nothing for you here." The lead rider laughed, an ugly sound. "Oh, I think there is, madam. Food, supplies, maybe some of McAllister's fine horses, and whatever cash he keeps in that strongbox under his bed." They knew the layout of the ranch, knew about Preston's habits. These weren't random rustlers. They'd been watching the place, waiting for an opportunity. "I'm armed," Daisy warned, bringing the revolver into view. "And I know how to use this." The last part was a lie, but they didn't need to know that. The leader's eyes narrowed. "That's McAllister's gun. Put it down before you hurt yourself, little lady. We don't want to harm you, but we will if necessary." Rusty lunged forward, barking furiously as the riders dismounted. The leader drew his own gun, pointing it at the dog. "Call off your dog, or I'll shoot him," he warned. "Rusty, come," Daisy commanded, terrified the man would make good on his threat. Reluctantly, the dog backed toward her, still growling. The three men advanced, and Daisy found herself backing into the house. Revolver still pointed at them, but her hand shaking visibly now. Rusty stayed at her side, a low, continuous growl rumbling from his chest. "Look," said the leader, "this can go easy or hard. You tell us where McAllister keeps his money, we take what we came for, and we leave you unharmed. Simple." "There's no money here," Daisy insisted, "and I won't help you steal from this ranch." The second man, shorter and broader than the leader, chuckled. "Loyal little thing, ain't she? McAllister's got himself a real firecracker." "Last chance, madam," the leader said, raising his gun to point directly at Daisy. "Where's the strongbox?" Time seemed to slow. Daisy could feel her heart pounding, blood rushing in her ears. The leader's finger tightened on the trigger. Rusty tensed beside her, ready to spring. And then, from somewhere behind the intruders, came the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. "Drop your weapons," Preston's voice commanded, cold and deadly. "Or I drop you." The rustlers froze, then slowly turned to find Preston, Miguel, and Carlos in the doorway, rifles aimed at their backs. "McAllister," the leader growled. "You're supposed to be out chasing ghosts in Blackwater Canyon." "Came back early when we realized the tracks were false," Preston replied. "A diversion meant to draw us away from the ranch." His eyes flickered to Daisy, relief evident in his expression, before his focus returned to the intruders. "Now, drop your guns. Slowly." The three men complied, carefully placing their weapons on the floor. "Kick them away," Preston ordered. Once they had done so, he nodded to Miguel and Carlos, who moved forward to restrain the men. Only when the rustlers were securely bound did Preston lower his rifle and move to Daisy's side. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle now, his eyes searching her face. Daisy nodded, though her legs suddenly felt unsteady. "Yes. They just arrived. They knew about the cattle, about the strongbox." "Garrison's crew," Preston said grimly. "They've been raiding ranches all through the territory. Sheriff's been after them for months." Daisy handed him the revolver, her hand still trembling. "I didn't know if I could actually use it." Preston's fingers closed around hers as he took the gun. "You did everything right. You kept them talking, kept yourself safe." His other hand came up to touch her cheek briefly. "I'm sorry you had to face this." "I'm just glad you came back when you did," Daisy said, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of his hand still wrapped around hers. Preston seemed to realize it too, stepping back slightly. "Carlos," he called, "ride into town and fetch Sheriff Turner. Tell him we've got Garrison and his men." The aftermath of the attempted robbery was a flurry of activity. Sheriff Turner and 2 deputies arrived to take the rustlers into custody, taking statements from Daisy and Preston about what had happened. It emerged that the gang had been responsible for a string of thefts throughout the territory, including the cattle from Preston's north pasture. "You got lucky?" "McAllister," Sheriff Turner said, as his deputies led the bound men to waiting horses. "If you hadn't turned back when you did." "I know," Preston acknowledged, his expression solemn. He glanced at Daisy, who was providing coffee to the deputies. Fortunately, Miss Palmer kept her wits about her. When the law officers finally departed with their prisoners, a heavy silence fell over the house. Miguel and Carlos had returned to their cabin, leaving Preston and Daisy alone. Exhaustion from the day's events washed over Daisy in waves, but her mind was too alert for sleep. Preston poured them each a small glass of whiskey, something he'd never done before. "For the nerves," he explained, offering one to Daisy. "You don't have to drink it if you don't want to." Daisy accepted the glass, taking a small sip and feeling the burn trail down her throat. "Thank you." They sat in the kitchen, the events of the day hanging between them. "I shouldn't have left you alone," Preston finally said, his voice tight with self-recrimination. "I knew there were rustlers in the area. I should have taken you into town, or asked Maria to stay with you." "You couldn't have known they would come here," Daisy countered. "And I'm fine. Nothing happened." "But it could have." Preston's eyes met hers, intense and troubled. "When I saw that man pointing his gun at you, I've never been so frightened in my life." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with significance beyond the immediate danger she had faced. "I was frightened too," Daisy admitted softly. "Not just of them, but the thought that you might not come back at all." Preston's hand moved across the table to cover hers. "Daisy," he began, then hesitated, seeming to search for words. "Yes? These past weeks, having you here?" He paused again. "I know our arrangement was meant to be strictly professional, but I find myself, I've come to—" He shook his head, frustrated by his own inability to express himself. "What I'm trying to say is, I care for you, more than I expected to, more than as just my housekeeper." Daisy felt warmth spread through her chest, a sensation that had nothing to do with the whiskey. "I care for you too, Preston." Relief washed over his features. "I don't want to rush you. After what happened with Holloway, I understand if you're hesitant. But I want you to know that my feelings are genuine. And they've grown stronger each day I've known you." Daisy considered her response carefully. "When I came west, I thought I knew what I wanted: security, a home, a husband I could respect even if I didn't love him yet. With Arthur, I was willing to settle for a practical arrangement." She met Preston's gaze steadily. "But now I find I want more than that. I want someone who sees me as a partner, not just a convenience. Someone I can trust with my heart as well as my future. And do you think—" Preston's voice was low, uncertain. "Do you think I could be that someone, given time?" Daisy smiled, turning her hand beneath his so their palms met, fingers intertwining. "I think you already are." The expression that bloomed on Preston's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, then brilliant. He rose from his chair, still holding her hand, drawing her gently to her feet. "May I kiss you, Daisy Palmer?" he asked, his voice husky. In answer, Daisy stepped closer, lifting her face to his. Preston's kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as she responded, his arms encircling her waist to draw her against him. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you in Martha's store," Preston confessed, resting his forehead against hers. Daisy laughed softly. "Even knowing I was meant for another man?" "Especially then," Preston admitted. "Holloway didn't deserve you. I remember thinking it was the most foolish thing a man could do, letting someone like you slip through his fingers." His expression grew serious. "I don't intend to make the same mistake." The weeks that followed were a time of transformation not just for Daisy and Preston, as their relationship deepened, but for the ranch itself. With Daisy's influence, the McAllister home became warmer, more inviting. She planted flowers along the walkway, hung curtains in windows that had been bare for years, and added small touches that made the house feel truly like a home. Preston, for his part, found himself working with renewed purpose. The ranch had always been his passion, but now it felt like he was building something more than just a cattle operation. He was creating a legacy, a future to share. They settled into a new rhythm, still maintaining certain boundaries. Daisy continued to sleep in her room, Preston in his, but their evenings were now spent planning together. sharing dreams and building a vision of what their life could be. Word spread through Copper Creek about the relationship developing at the McAllister Ranch. Martha Williams, visiting one Sunday afternoon, couldn't contain her delight. "I knew the moment I saw you two together that first day," she declared. "Some things are just meant to be." Even Arthur Holloway, encountering Preston in town one day, had the grace to look sheepish. "Heard you and Miss Palmer are courting properly now," he said awkwardly. "We are," Preston confirmed, unable to keep the satisfaction from his voice. "Well," Arthur said, shifting uncomfortably, "I'm glad it worked out for her. She seems like a fine woman." "The finest," Preston agreed. "And Holloway, I owe you my thanks. Your carelessness brought the most important person in my life to my doorstep." 6 months after Daisy's arrival in Copper Creek, Preston took her on a picnic to a spot overlooking the ranch. The autumn air was crisp, the cottonwoods along the creek turning golden in the afternoon sun. They spread a blanket beneath a solitary oak tree, sharing a meal Daisy had prepared and watching as the shadows lengthened across the valley. "Do you ever regret it?" Preston asked suddenly. "Coming west to marry a man you'd never met?" Daisy considered the question. "I regret my naivety," she finally said, "believing everything Arthur wrote without question. But I can't regret the journey itself, not when it led me here." She smiled at him. "Not when it led me to you." Preston reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet pouch. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "I'm not sure there is a perfect moment, but this place, it's always been special to me. My father proposed to my mother under this very tree." Daisy's heart quickened as Preston opened the pouch, tipping a ring into his palm. It was a simple design, a single diamond set in gold, but in the late afternoon light, it seemed to capture all the brilliance of the sun. "Daisy Palmer," Preston said, taking her hand. "When you arrived in Copper Creek, you were promised to another man. When that promise was broken, I told you that you were free to choose me or not, once you'd had time to think." His eyes, so blue and earnest, held hers. "I'm hoping you've had enough time, and that your choice is me. Will you marry me? Be my wife, my partner in everything?" Tears welled in Daisy's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Preston McAllister, I choose you, today and every day." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that promised forever, Daisy marveled at the twists of fate that had brought her here. She had traveled west, seeking security, a practical arrangement with a man she hoped to eventually care for. Instead, she had found love deep, true, and unexpected, with a man who saw her not just as a wife, but as an equal, a partner in creating the life they both desired. Their wedding took place the following spring, when wildflowers carpeted the hills around Copper Creek. The entire community turned out for the celebration. Held on the McAllister Ranch beneath an arbor, Preston and Miguel had constructed specially for the occasion. Martha Williams helped Daisy prepare. Carlos's wife Maria provided traditional Mexican dishes for the feast, and even the Holloways attended. Arthur still somewhat abashed, but his wife Rebecca genuinely warm in her congratulations. Judge Parker, who had ridden in from the county seat, pronounced them husband and wife just as the sun reached its zenith, casting no shadows as Preston and Daisy sealed their vows with a kiss that drew cheers from the assembled guests. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music and dancing under lantern light. As twilight deepened into night, Preston led his bride away from the festivities, toward the home they would now officially share. "Happy Mrs. McAllister?" he asked, his arm around her waist as they walked. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Daisy replied, leaning into his embrace. "When I stepped off that stagecoach and learned Arthur had married another, I thought my world had ended. I couldn't see that it was just beginning." Preston stopped, turning to face her, his expression solemn in the moonlight. "I promise you, Daisy, I will spend every day making sure you never regret choosing me." "I already know I won't," she assured him, reaching up to touch his face. The mail-order bride was told she'd been replaced. The cowboy said, "Then you're free to choose me." And that choice has made all the difference. 5 years later, the McAllister Ranch had prospered beyond even Preston's ambitious dreams. The cattle operation had expanded. A new barn had been raised with the help of neighbors during an old-fashioned barn raising, and the ranch house itself had grown, with an addition built to accommodate the family's needs. Those needs now included 3-year-old Thomas, named for Preston's father, and 1-year-old Elizabeth, named for Daisy's mother. The children brought new joy and purpose to the ranch, their laughter filling the house and their future shaping Preston and Daisy's decisions about the land and business. Daisy had also realized her dream of opening a dress shop, though not quite as she had imagined in Boston. Instead, she worked from a sunny room in their expanded home, creating special occasion dresses for the women of Copper Creek and the surrounding ranches. Her reputation for fine workmanship had spread throughout the territory, bringing customers from as far as Phoenix for wedding gowns and other important garments. One crisp autumn evening, much like the day Preston had proposed, the family gathered on the porch after dinner. Thomas played with wooden horses Preston had carved for him. Elizabeth dozed in her mother's arms, and Rusty, now gray-muzzled but still loyal, dozed at Preston's feet. "I got a letter today," Daisy said, watching as the sun sank toward the western horizon. "From Rebecca Holloway." Preston raised an eyebrow. They maintained cordial relations with the Holloways as neighbors, but weren't particularly close. "Oh? Everything all right?" "Yes," Daisy said. "They're moving to California. Arthur's brother has land there, and they're going to join him in a new venture." She smiled slightly. She wanted to say goodbye properly, and to thank us. "Thank us?" Preston repeated, puzzled. "For what?" "For showing them what a true partnership looks like," Daisy quoted from the letter. She said watching us over the years helped her demand more from her own marriage, and now Arthur treats her as an equal, not just a wife. Preston reached over to take Daisy's free hand, his thumb tracing over the wedding band that now accompanied the engagement ring he'd given her. "Smart woman, that Rebecca." "Yes," Daisy agreed softly. "Though I think we've learned as much about partnership as we've taught." Preston nodded, looking out over the ranch, their ranch, built with shared dreams and mutual respect. "Every day," he said. "I learned something new about being a husband, a father, a better man, just by loving you." As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Daisy leaned her head against Preston's shoulder, Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in her arms, Thomas now climbing into his father's lap. In the distance, cattle lowed softly as they settled for the night, and somewhere an owl called, announcing the transition from day to evening. This was the life she had traveled west to find, though she hadn't known it then. Not a practical arrangement with a stranger, but a love story written day by day, challenge by challenge, joy by joy. A story that had begun with disappointment, but had transformed into something far richer than she could have imagined when she stepped off that stagecoach into the dust of Copper Creek. "I love you, Preston McAllister," she said softly. His arm tightened around her shoulders. "And I love you, Daisy McAllister. Today and every day until the stars fall from the sky." As darkness settled over the McAllister ranch, the family remained on the porch, wrapped in the warmth of belonging, of home, of love, freely chosen and nurtured through all the seasons of their life together. What had begun as a desperate gamble, a mail-order bride seeking security, a lonely rancher offering sanctuary, had blossomed into a union of equals, a partnership that strengthened them both. And in the years to come, as their children grew and the ranch flourished, Preston and Daisy would often return to that oak tree on the ridge, the place where he had proposed, to remember how their story began, and to celebrate how it continued to unfold day by day, choice by choice, love by love.